The tires crunched over the gravel as Michael Renner's black SUV pulled up to the front gate of his ranch. It had been a grueling few months in courtrooms across the state, and he had been looking forward to this weekend of quiet solitude. His ranch was his sanctuary, tucked away on 50 acres of land he'd owned for over a decade. The pine trees swayed gently in the warm breeze, and the horizon stretched wide with not a soul in sight, or so he thought. As he approached the gate, he noticed something out of place. Flashing lights flickered from the corner of his property. A sheriff's cruiser sat near the fence line, its doors open. 2 deputies stood with arms folded, and behind them, pacing, and pointing animatedly, was a woman in her mid-50s wearing oversized sunglasses, a visor and a clipboard tucked under her arm. Michael sighed, already sensing the energy from a mile away, an energy he knew too well from court depositions, entitled, loud, and entirely convinced she was in the right. The deputy held up a hand as Michael rolled to a stop. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some ID. We had a report of a trespasser trying to enter private property." Michael kept his tone calm, almost amused. "This is my property. I'm not trespassing." The woman stormed forward before the deputy could respond. "That's him. That's the guy I saw jump the gate last week. I told you this land is part of the Whispering Pines HOA, and no one comes in without authorization. He didn't even display a community pass." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, I don't need a pass to enter land I own, and this property has never been under any HOA jurisdiction." Karen, her name was clear from the name badge proudly displayed on her lanyard, snorted. "That's not true. We expanded the boundaries 2 years ago. Everyone knows that. I sent letters and there was a vote." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "Sir, do you have documentation that proves you own this land?" Michael calmly reached into his glove box and pulled out a folder. "Not only do I have the deed, but I have the original zoning maps and court rulings that clearly show this ranch is outside of Whispering Pines. I've never received a single HOA notice until recently, and I'm beginning to understand why." The deputy examined the paperwork and glanced back at Karen. "Ma'am, this checks out. He owns the property free and clear. There's no legal record of the HOA's boundary, including this land." Karen's voice rose. "I saw him. He's building something back there. Probably a cabin or a shed, and it violates our structure codes. You're just going to let him do whatever he wants?" Michael stepped out of the SUV slowly, his height and calm demeanor making the moment even more commanding. "Karen, I'm a federal judge. I specialize in land use and property rights. I'm well aware of what you're attempting to do here. And let me make something very clear. Calling the police on a legal property owner for no reason is not only harassment, it's misuse of public services." She faltered for the first time, her mouth opening and closing. You're a judge?" "Yes. And while I came here for rest, I think I'll be looking into exactly how far this HOA has overstepped its legal limits." "This isn't over." The deputy nodded awkwardly. "Sorry for the inconvenience, sir. You're free to go." Michael nodded politely, eyes never leaving Karen's. She took a step back, her smug expression replaced by something colder and tighter. As the SUV crept through the now opening gate, Michael glanced in the mirror. She was still standing there, arms crossed, clipboard held like a shield. Whatever she thought she was controlling, she was about to find out she picked the wrong landowner. Karen Whitmore had always seen herself as a pillar of the community. When she moved into Whispering Pines 7 years ago, she didn't just buy a house. She claimed a kingdom. A retired insurance claims officer with too much time and a relentless need for control, Karen quickly maneuvered her way into the HOA board, starting as a secretary, but rising through the ranks with swift and unnerving precision. Before long, she was the unofficial president of the association, though the board claimed to rotate leadership every year. In practice, no one else wanted to deal with the chaos that came with disagreeing with Karen. Those who tried either moved away or stopped attending meetings altogether. The HOA was originally set up to cover about 40 homes nestled within the gated confines of Whispering Pines, a modest but well-kept community. But under Karen's reign, boundaries became a matter of perspective. What started as reminders about Lawn care quickly turned into threats of fines for unauthorized vehicle parking, excessive noise violations, and even holiday decoration misconduct. Residents received letters about issues as absurd as leaving their garbage cans out 15 minutes too long or having a wind chime that exceeded decibel limits. People complained, but Karen always had one response: read your contract. If you don't like it, move. But it wasn't enough for Karen to control the existing homes. 2 years prior, she had quietly orchestrated a campaign to expand the HOA boundaries by arguing that nearby unincorporated land was visually tied to Whispering Pines and should therefore be held to the same standards. It started with a few undeveloped lots that bordered the main road, and eventually, she included the outermost properties that were never legally annexed into the HOA. She printed new flyers with altered maps and mailed them out to landowners who had no affiliation with the community, insisting they were now subject to new regulations and annual dues. Some ignored her. Others, unsure of the legality, reluctantly paid. When Judge Michael Renner purchased the ranch over a decade ago, it was zoned as private rural property, outside any community restrictions. It was one of the main reasons he chose the spot: privacy, autonomy, and no bureaucracy. For years, the HOA had left him alone, but Karen had recently turned her attention outward. In her mind, the ranch was an eyesore, with its long unpaved road, natural landscape, and a small metal structure that she had labeled an unauthorized dwelling. To Karen, Michael's property was out of sync with the aesthetic character of Whispering Pines. After the incident at the gate, Karen doubled down. She posted in the Whispering Pines Neighborhood Watch Facebook group, calling Michael a potential squatter, and claimed she was working closely with local law enforcement to ensure community safety. She uploaded blurry photos of his truck entering the ranch, suggested he was building illegal structures, and encouraged residents to report any strange activity near the perimeter. Her posts were aggressive and filled with thinly veiled personal attacks, and many residents, already conditioned by her paranoia, joined in without question. Michael didn't respond, at least not publicly. Instead, he quietly started collecting. He documented every letter she sent, every fake citation she printed on unofficial HOA letterhead, and even intercepted a notice of lien Karen attempted to file with the county claiming he owed over $2,300 in back HOA dues. She had no legal grounds for such a claim, but that didn't stop her from mailing the paperwork and CCing half the board. The more Michael uncovered, the deeper the rot seemed to run. Karen had created a kind of HOA empire, fueled by fear and misinformation. One couple who lived on the edge of the community reported they had been fined for constructing a chicken coop on their land that was zoned agricultural and never legally tied to the HOA. A veteran in the neighborhood shared that she'd been publicly shamed for having an American flag hung improperly during a holiday weekend and received 2 warnings within a month. And one elderly resident had received daily citations for having yellowing grass, even though he'd just been discharged from the hospital after surgery. It was more than overreach. It was harassment. What made it worse was the way Karen had managed to weaponize the local police. Though the sheriff's department had limited patience for her calls, she often exaggerated emergencies. Her tone over the phone would imply intruders, suspicious men with tools, or unauthorized construction that could be tied to illegal activity. It was enough to generate welfare checks or vehicle stops. Michael later learned from one sympathetic deputy that Karen had logged over 70 calls in the past 18 months, more than anyone else in the entire county. Using his judicial access to public records, Michael compiled a comprehensive dossier of every complaint, map alteration, and fraudulent document. He didn't interfere directly. He wanted it clean, he wanted it legal, and he wanted it final. Meanwhile, Karen continued her crusade. She drafted a civil complaint accusing Michael of violating HOA guidelines. She cited fake covenants she had written herself, mixing language from real bylaws with arbitrary rules she invented, like requiring all structures to be painted natural earth tones and banning non-native vegetation. She mailed it out with the Whispering Pines seal, a logo she had designed herself. complete with a pine cone and a gavel, which ironically bore a resemblance to the federal judiciary's emblem. She began patrolling the ranch perimeter in her golf cart, armed with binoculars and a camera documenting violations. Residents saw her sitting at the edge of her driveway for hours, staring down the dusty road that led to Michael's property, waiting for any activity she could report. One afternoon, she parked in the middle of the access road, blocking a delivery truck from reaching the ranch. She told the driver the land was under legal review and could not be accessed without community clearance. Word began to spread. A few neighbors who had never met. The community center at Whispering Pines was usually quiet on weekday evenings, reserved for yoga classes or gardening club meetings. But tonight, it was packed. The folding chairs were filled, the back wall lined with curious residents, and a few local reporters hovered near the exit with cameras ready. At the front of the room, the familiar figure of Karen Whitmore stood poised at the podium, a thick binder opened before her. Her hair was tightly pulled back, her glasses perched low on her nose, and the unmistakable smugness in her expression made it clear she believed this would be the crowning moment of her reign. She cleared her throat. Tonight, we address a serious violation of community standards. As your acting HOA president, I've received multiple reports regarding unauthorized development, security risks, and non-compliance with established guidelines. She paused, letting her words settle, her eyes scanning the room. The individual in question has refused to acknowledge our jurisdiction and has disrespected the rules we all agree to live by. A few heads nodded. Others glanced around awkwardly. One man whispered, "Isn't this about that judge?" Karen raised a printed image, a blurry zoomed-in photo of Michael's SUV entering his ranch, and held it high. This was taken 3 weeks ago. As you can see, no visible community decal. No construction approval. No landscaping conformity. Complete disregard for the standards that make Whispering Pines the beautiful place it is. She moved to turn, a page in her binder, but the back door of the room opened and a tall, composed man in a dark blue suit stepped in. The buzz of murmurs swelled as Judge Michael Renner made his way to the front, his briefcase in hand. He wasn't wearing his robes, yet, but the authority he carried was unmistakable. Karen's voice faltered. "Excuse me, this is a closed board meeting for HOA members only." Michael didn't raise his voice. "As a landowner targeted by this board, and as a federal judge conducting an investigation into illegal HOA activity, I have every right to be here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen flushed, then forced a laugh. "Investigation? You've got to be joking. This is a homeowners meeting. We're just trying to protect our values." Michael turned to the crowd. "How many of you received letters from this HOA claiming your land was newly included in their boundaries?" Hands went up. "How many of you were fined for things that were never in the original bylaws?" More hands. "And how many of you were intimidated, harassed, or reported to local police without reason?" The room grew silent. Slowly, more hands lifted into the air. Michael set his briefcase on the table beside Karen's binder and clicked it open. "Over the last 2 months, I've compiled evidence of systematic abuse of power by this HOA leadership, including false documents, forged boundary maps, and misappropriation of community funds. I have copies of letters, audio recordings, and official county property records, none of which support the claims made by Ms. Whitmore and her small inner circle." Karen's face turned red. "That's slander. You're not even part of the community." "You're correct," Michael said, his voice firm. "My property was never part of Whispering Pines, and yet you filed fraudulent paperwork attempting to claim jurisdiction. You called law enforcement on me, twice. You've harassed delivery drivers, threatened construction workers, and even attempted to file a lien against land that you have no legal authority over." One of the board members, a soft-spoken woman named Linda, who had rarely said a word in meetings, leaned into her microphone. "Is that true, Karen? Did you try to file a lien on land that's not under our authority?" Karen hesitated. "It was a precautionary measure. I believed he was in violation of extended HOA covenants. I had the right to act." Michael pulled out a document and held it up. "This is a cease and desist letter issued by the federal court. It was delivered to Ms. Whitmore last week. The court has also granted an injunction halting all HOA actions regarding expanded jurisdiction, pending a formal investigation. That includes fines, citations, liens, and surveillance. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came. She stepped back slightly, visibly shaking. Michael continued. As of this morning, a federal motion has been filed to dissolve the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association due to repeated violations of residents' constitutional property rights, misuse of local law enforcement, and attempts to fabricate legal authority. The State Attorney General's office has opened a separate investigation into potential civil rights violations. Several people gasped audibly. One older man in the back cheered quietly under his breath. Karen tried to regain composure. "You can't do this. You can't just walk in here and tear down everything we've built. You're abusing your position." Michael met her gaze. "I didn't come here to tear anything down. I came here to stop someone who's been using fear, threats, and lies to control people. You don't run a community, Karen. You run a dictatorship disguised as a neighborhood watch." Just then, two federal marshals entered the room and stood by the wall. Karen turned to look at them, her face pale. One of them stepped forward and addressed her calmly. "Ms. Whitmore, you're being served a federal summons. You are required to appear in court to respond to charges regarding fraudulent activity involving HOA governance and public resource abuse." Karen's clipboard slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. She looked around the room for support, but the crowd was silent. Even her closest allies sat motionless, some staring at the floor, others turning away. Michael turned to the crowd one last time. "You deserve better. HOA boards are supposed to serve the community, not rule over it. It's time to rebuild, legally and fairly." With that, he nodded to the marshals and stepped back as Karen, visibly shaken, was quietly escorted out of the room. Over the following weeks, the news spread like wildfire. The story of the HOA Karen versus the federal judge made headlines across the region. Interviews with residents revealed just how far Karen had gone: false dues, threats to call CPS on a single mother over a swing set, even blocking emergency services over aesthetic concerns. The court proceedings were swift. With overwhelming evidence, the HOA was officially dissolved, its assets frozen, and all fraudulent citations declared void. Michael returned to his ranch shortly after the ruling. The peace he'd been denied finally returned, not just for him but for dozens of residents who had lived under Karen's control for years. No longer would they be fined for planting daisies instead of native shrubs or warned for having slightly faded patio furniture. And as for Karen, her name became a cautionary tale about unchecked power in small communities. The clipboard queen of Whispering Pines had fallen, not to a neighbor's complaint or a board vote, but to the very law she thought she could twist in her favor. Michael, once again at ease on his porch with a cup of coffee and the sound of birdsong in the air, smiled to himself. Justice had been served not in the courtroom but at home.